July 1st, 1863. We are hungover. Mickens filled his private reserve of alcohol and drank himself into a stupor. This morning, he was still in the throes of his spirits. Splinter and I dragged him back to our camp. Martino found a dancing partner last night, but she was twice his age. He loved every minute of it, knowing that his flirtatious behavior had James and I on the floor laughing. James shoved me with a sarcastic remark. "Dutch, are you going to let him lead your grandmother on like that?" I raised the back of my palm over my forehead and appeared faint. "9! Leave my Oma alone!" To the tune of Buffalo Gals, Martino swung that sweet old woman around as we gorged ourselves with spirits. The Galusha brothers had indulged in drink just like the rest of us. They were to be seen, arms linked, high-stepping in a stately round, much to the joy of all who watched their performance. If I had known they would show us all up like that, I would not have come, grumbled James. It has become known to us that General Sedgwick is disappointed in our corps. He banned alcohol in our camp. Too many in our brigade were too liberal with Manchester's hospitality. All of that dancing made poor Martino sick. Could Uncle John blame us after all of this marching he has put us through? The order is to step off at 11 a.m. I thought that writing would sober me up, but I think I need to lay down. The morning has been soured. We have been issued 3 days' rations and 60 rounds. Everyone knows what that means. Confederates are close, and will be seeing the elephant again in short order. It is just a matter of time, but how much? Some regiments have been known to wait for as long as 5 days, while others only 60 minutes. It is difficult to decide which I'd prefer. We best sober up our friend Mickens right quick. If the shooting begins today, he would be no use on the line. There are occasions in this diary where I've taken to the pencil to write out my anxieties. Sometimes, the process of putting down what is on the mind alleviates the immediate dread of the unknown. It is a useful distraction. I could write a book in the time we've still been idle in Manchester. The brigade has not moved out, and it's been 7 hours past 11 a.m. Either way, I cannot spend most of this time writing. Mickens is still drunk from last night. His intoxication worked him up into a tizzy when those ammunition and cracker crates were busted open. He is sobering up now, but he has nervous fits that preoccupy my time. He is quite annoying, especially when I need to write my letters to Mother and Julia with a clear head. July 2nd, 1863. It is finally morning. Even though we have but small respite during a night of long marches, what time we did have to sleep seemed like it stretched into eternity. Our column was marched in the wrong direction, but our course was corrected, and we finally arrived at the Baltimore Pike to link up with our corps. Unnecessary marching always bothers a soldier. We quietly complained to ourselves. When we asked about how the 119th fared, one fella in our regiment responded that we're rough and regular. There is some truth to that. Our corps of Greek crosses have been fighting this war for long enough to revel in our accomplishments. Hell, I remarked to Jory, I remember worrying about how much I could take back when we were camped in Philly. That may have been an error. For a few hours now, the phrase, "Hell, I remember," has been used to full comedic effect. Hell, I remember when I discovered bugs in my soup. Hell, I remember when I forgot my extra socks. Hell, I remember when I missed my saucy kitty due to a separation of 200 miles. 200 miles? How do you figure that, Jack? Do you know your way to her house? Hell, I remember when I know not what. We have all come a very long way in the past 11 months, but our humor has an even farther way to go. The Baltimore Pike itself is paved in crushed limestone. Over many years, thousands of shoes, wheels, and hooves ground the stone into a fine powder. Almost every man's lungs are now coated with grit, creating a symphony of coughing, sneezing, and hacking. Something remarkable happened early this morning. As we tramped down the pike, the entire Sixth Corps sang John Brown's Body under a summer moon. That's 12,000 men marching in step, singing loudly, with an accompanying brass band. The emotion from that moment turned all of us into one. We are the Sixth Corps, and we're here to complete God's work. Hell, I'll remember that. It's near sundown, and our regiment is at a place called Rock Creek. We're being held in reserve while a monumental struggle is occurring to our front. Meade's Army of the Potomac and Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, have been dueling each other since yesterday near this spot. We are anticipating a rebel attack. Writing provides me the comfort needed to calm my nerves. Along the whole march to Gettysburg, we could hear the struggle from where we were marching on the Baltimore Pike. The column grew quieter as we came closer and closer to the battlefield. While we moved towards the fight, stragglers from the Ninth Corps were filing down the pike in the opposite direction. Oh, I'm sorry, the 11th Corps. They were recognized by their crescent moon corps badges and the distinctive sound of German being spoken. These poor soldiers were whipped and looked as if they were trampled by an elephant. Some in our division were calling them out, chastising them for once again betraying the army like they did at Chancellorsville. The nativism that many hold towards immigrants to our country was out in force. I studied the faces of these 11th Corps survivors intensely as they stumbled down the pike. Many had matted hair, their uniforms splattered with blood and gore. It was difficult to determine if the blood was their own or that of a filemate who had been struck down. Some of them looked shocked, as if they had seen a great horror. Articles of their uniforms were missing, and some didn't even have rifles. What storm are we about to march into? I am sad, but relieved to be writing from Pennsylvania. Even in the chaos, being back in my home state provides an eerie sense of security. Women hailing from the farms alongside the pike have been gracious to us. They exemplify the Republican values of our nation by caring for our basic needs. The march was very long, and most of us drank our canteens dry. Long lines alongside the road formed whenever a well, spring, or stream appeared. Our NCOs kept us separate, thinking that the long lines of eager water seekers would hold our main column up. To our relief, a local woman and her young daughters offered us water alongside the road. I thanked her profusely when she gave me a dipper of water. She replied in her German accent, "I have a son fighting up the road, so any mother would contribute what she could. Please take care of each other and be safe. All of this happened as the raging sounds of two clashing armies shook the very air. The farming families that live here speak German, but it's difficult to understand them. It's German that sounds much older than the language we speak in Philadelphia. Either way, hearing these farmers speak reminded me of home. Keith can speak with these German farmers, originating from far to the west of Philadelphia. We are not really sure what town he is from. He has never mentioned it. Every passing mile brings us closer to the battle. It sounds like a thunderstorm ahead of us. The sky even resembles a storm. Smoke billows from the horizon and fills the blue sky with a chalky smog. The smell of battle has infiltrated our column. The odor of decomposing bodies and sulfur violates our nostrils, stimulating our senses in a dreadful manner. Dwelling on what is to become our future has made many silent with fear, nervousness, or sadness. Christian is leading a decade of the Rosary for many Catholic soldiers in Company A. I rhythmically follow the cadence of their prayers by tapping my fingers on the back of this journal as I write. Jory doesn't intervene in the prayer. Soon, the sounds of battle were so loud that the noise defied our thoughts. Each concussion from the guns could be felt in our temples and throats. We pressed on. The column could not afford to be tired, even though we had marched 38 miles. Everyone depended on each other. Exhaustion on the battlefield is unacceptable. Talking ceased so energy could be conserved for the fight. The pike was shaking from the loud sound of battle, vibrating up through our shoes. It was a very strange sensation, but these vibrations helped relieve the pain in our feet. One could not help but dwell on the numbers of Americans being killed that very moment. The sounds of battle simply did not stop. Jack could be heard spitting tobacco at anything he could reach. The men around him idly asked him to hit targets of their choice. It was close to sundown when we reached the outskirts of Gettysburg. A refugee family was spotted on the pike. An old man, his wife, and teenage daughters lugged a cart filled with pots, pans, trunks of clothing, bags, and food. A refugee family in the 119th's, home state? This was a difficult sight to comprehend, and a stark reminder of how serious this fight was. I remembered what the citizens of Manchester said about the rebels who looted and kidnapped Marylanders. They must have been so scared. I was wrong about this family's fear. When our brigade marched by, the oldest of the teenage daughters stepped in front of a staff lieutenant on horseback. She demanded a rifle and a space in line. Her father's eyes cast themselves down in embarrassment, and he scolded her. Unashamed, she stared directly into our eyes and urged us to send the rebels back to hell. The lieutenant responded loudly to the brave girl so all of us could hear. If I come back from this fight and find this girl, she will be my bride. We let out a huzzah. Our spines were stiffened, and we proudly marched forward towards the conflict. This refugee family looked on with pride as their fellow Pennsylvanians marched past. Our purpose became clear at that moment. We were needed at the front to protect our home state. This family could have been my own. An overwhelming sense of pride for my home in Pennsylvania gave me the courage to finish the march. Brigadier General David Russell deployed us along Rock Creek and informed us that we were in reserve. The sound of battle was terrifyingly close. The leaves of the trees were disrupted. falling prematurely from the pounding of rifles and cannons. I watched the birds circle the trees with great anxiety, not making any noise loud enough to overcome the thunder of war. Darkness set in, and many tried to rest. The gunfire lessened in frequency, but it was replaced by the smell of the dead. Worst of all, the cries and screams of the dying could be noticed throughout the night. If this battle was to continue another day, tomorrow, we would need as much energy as we could possibly muster. Sentries encountered many soldiers who stumbled into our lines, asking for medical attention. July 3rd, 1863. The 119th was roused very early this morning. There was a relative quiet on the field. At 1:30 p.m., the earth opened up. The loudest noise I've ever heard shook the ground. Everyone ran to our stacked muskets, expecting to be sent to the front. The sound was even louder and more intense than yesterday. We concluded that the source of this cacophony was an artillery bombardment. Was it from our own guns, or were the rebels hitting our line? Christian was certain that it was Confederate artillery. Indeed, it was a topic that was hotly debated. The bombardment ceased after an hour or two, and was followed by silence. We carefully listened for clues. What was happening? Brass bands could be heard, but the tune was unrecognizable at our distance. Later in the day, we learned that this noise was coming from Robert E. Lee's final assault on our Army's position. 15,000 Confederates charged across a mile of open ground to attack the center of the Federal position. In a half-hour's time, Union guns opened up from all directions. The high ground nearby our position, called Big Round Top, was packed with our cannons. These guns dealt death blows from afar, pulping their targets into mere remembrances of humanity. We found out later that whole sections of men were turned into a fine mist that coated the back of men's throats along the battle lines. The sound of this engagement was spectacular. In less than an hour, more than 11,000 of those rebels who made the charge were killed or wounded. The only indication that we had won came from a thunderous battle cry from all down the line. Tens of thousands of Union soldiers from Culp's Hill all the way to our position threw their hats up in cheers. Later, I learned that during the attack, Union soldiers were chanting, "Fredericksburg! Fredericksburg!" over and over again to antagonize the rebels. The bloodletting they delivered today was an equal substitution for what the Confederates did to them last year. The jubilation of this moment was something I would never forget. Although we only had an auditory experience of the Battle of Gettysburg, it shook us to our core. July 4th, 1863. Huzzah! What a glorious 4th! News about the fall of Vicksburg has become known, officially splitting the Confederacy in two pieces along the Mississippi River. Here, in my home state, the infamous Robert E. Lee was stopped in his tracks. His invasion of our state was done to relieve pressure away from Vicksburg. He wished to deal a striking blow to the Union and end the war here. We did not allow this to happen. Ever since the Emancipation Proclamation, rebels view this war as a revolution that they need to crush. The arming of African American soldiers and the federal government's proclamation to free the slaves has galvanized the southern states into desperate action. On this 4th of July, the 119th will celebrate a new revolutionary heritage. one that surpasses 1776, which stopped short at guaranteeing democracy and liberty to all Americans. Yesterday, we collectively fought, bled, and marched to reform this country forever. With our contribution, may freedom ring for hundreds of generations. We must remind the Confederates that they can no longer claim the 4th of July as a day to uphold their heritage. We will redefine American patriotism with our bullets and determination. The 119th has been ordered to occupy Big Round Top just in case the Confederates try again. Out of divine providence, we relieved the 118th Pennsylvania, our sister regiment. We embraced and learned about the Corn Exchange and their experiences at Gettysburg. They arrived at Gettysburg early on July 2nd and were sent in to support General Sickles at the wheat field around 4 p.m. 3 were killed, 19 wounded, and 3 went missing. Many of our friends in this regiment proudly told about how level-headed the regiment was while holding back advancing rebels. The word of Lieutenant Rodney's death in May saddened many of the officers of the 118th. They spoke of Rodney's accomplishments back in Philadelphia as a civic leader, and that we must drink to him. After wishing each other a glorious 4th, we parted ways and took up their posts. Lieutenant Rodney did not leave my mind for the entirety of our celebration. If only he was here to experience this historic day. Peeking through the trees, we had a view of the battlefield from our elevated position. The clump of rocks I later learned was called Devil's Den, was coated in corpses and blood. July 5th, 1863. Relief has been given to us. Russell moved our brigade down Big Round Top and marched us toward the Confederate line to pursue the rebels. Our eyes gazed upon the aftermath of such terrible fighting. At the base of Big Round Top lay a section of tumbled boulders. Within these rocks were the tangled remains of many soldiers. Above this valley of death reared the monoliths of Devil's Den. We found the ground to be completely saturated and muddy. The path was turned into a slop that oozed over our shoes and splattered onto our trousers. George lost his footing and fell hard into the mire. When he got up, he looked shocked. "It's blood. All of it." We looked at him stupidly, failing to comprehend his words. "The mud has been made with blood." He was right. As he scraped the sticky mess from his hands, a dark red stain remained in his skin. We did not know where to cast our eyes, but our rate of march quickened noticeably. Later that evening, all of us would discover our socks stained by the remains of those brave men. Near the vicinity of the wheat field, I saw a rebel with a gaping head wound. The man twitched as if alive, despite his brains leaking down his cheek. There were so many people strewn across the once serene wheat field that many doubted if there had ever been wheat growing there at all. Flies clouded the air, and we had to swat them away during our passage through that horrid place. There were bloated corpses hissing with corruption, frozen in a state of painful rigor mortis. Many were deflated after losing every ounce of blood. Observing the sources of these fatal wounds provided a gruesome context to the final moments of their lives. Many of their final actions involved the rapid tearing of their own clothing, frantically searching for the wound. Jackets were ripped. Belts and haversack straps were tangled around the arms of the petrified dead. Some were seen clutching bullet wounds, illustrating that they tried in vain to stop the bleeding. Others were reduced to strips of flesh, riddled with dozens of bullets. I have been at Salem's church, but this has shaken me. I thought that I was hardened. Rivers of blood stained the ground. We were traversing a killing field. Viewing the aftermath of the great battle reminded me of the Confederate resolve. To what extent are they willing to defend their cause? To what extent am I willing to challenge them? Later that night, our regiment was engaged with a rebel line. Fog obstructed our visibility, but we came out on top. After 10 minutes of dealing a deadly fire, the Confederates surrendered. They were from South Carolina, the state which started it all.